my job was to help to put together a series of public artworks for the BRT stations. And first off, I must just applaud ARG Design for keeping that on the agenda, because with all of the difficulties that they had with the politics and the budgets around this and things falling off along the way, I think there were many opportunities when the art program could have fallen off entirely. So, thanks to them for really motivating for it. And when you get to see this, I'm going to have to rush through these images, but one of the overall comments is just how much we managed to do with a very small budget, and how a range of artists, designers, animators really went a long way, because I think they really believe in the potential of what art can do in these kinds of public spaces. So I just showed some of these images of the Moscow subway in the pictures that we had to do to the engineers in the city and the project managers, just to keep them convinced about the importance of art in public transit systems. And one recalls Moscow in 1931, one of the first subways, they treated it like a palace. Transport for the workers was put at the center of the agenda. So just important reminders, I think, for us in a moment like this. And then the other project that I spoke to a lot was the New York subway project, which began in the 70s, I think. And it's been, really one of the groundbreaking public art projects, using some of the top artists. This is Eric Fischl. He's a painter, but that's a very detailed mosaic work, and sculptors like Tom Ottenes. This is in the financial district of downtown New York. So just to kind of convince people the potential of what public art can really be, and that it doesn't have to be dumbed down, but it can be a diversity of things. So the first phase was really to look at the three big venues that the city had ahead of 2010, the airport, the civic center, and the stadium. I have spoken to this briefly. Zaid Minty invited me to give a talk for the Creative Cape Town sessions. So some of you might have heard this. So Sue Williamson, through a public tender process, 3 artists were chosen for that. They were all women artists, and all, I think, very accomplished. Sue Williamson did the airport art commission, and her inspiration was the mountain and the visitor experience, or rather the records of the visitor experience through history. So she went through all the diaries of various people, Lady Anne Barnard, Lacalle, and more recent people, and spoke to this idea of clouds, voices from history talking about experiences of the Cape. So Sue's a world-renowned artist. She has works in international collections all over the world. So it was really a privilege to have her spend so much time on this work, and she really did a lot of research. The idea was to group it around themes, slavery being one, food, weather, wind, various things. And it was quite a job just technically trying to figure out how we're going to structure this. There are also a lot of technical issues around sandblasting glass and liabilities and so on, but it worked out great. It was quite an ambitious job to do in a short time. The buses were starting to run, scaffolding was up, but it all got done in time, and quite an intricate piece of work. There's Sue inspecting it while they're sandblasting it with the masking it off, pulling it out. And she had it all up, and some of the speech bubbles remained blank, so she still had the chance to add others into it later, other voices. And the mountain is the backdrop to this, so all the way along they refer to different aspects of this particular vista. So some got filled in later. These are some of the themes that she worked with: shipping news, wind, slavery, fish, prejudice of all sorts. And it's a great thing to engage with if you're waiting and you don't have time. You don't have to engage with it. It's quite subtle, but you can engage with it if you want to. And it also has a sort of textual element, which is exciting. The next big one Wilfred just mentioned was the Civic Center, which was an enormous engineering architectural job, also to do in record time, to transform this 1970s space. Actually has fantastic paving design. I'm very pleased they kept the paving design. There's a whole discussion around that. But underneath this particular walkway podium, there's a series of screens that were built. And Juliana Stopoulos, who's actually a theatre designer, she comes from a theatre background, she won this commission. She's also an illustrator. So it was to do both sides of these two walls, which are really a fairly large area, and then they have the dancing column legacy to deal with too. So they're also made with this, with these different facets. And it actually worked out pretty well. So her idea was to look at the city past and present. So she sort of took these four aspects of the city, looking back towards a mountain, towards the sea, which is maybe the city from the 60s and 70s. And then on the outsides, to look at a kind of futuristic vision of the city, which is much more playful, more bold, to be seen from the outside. And the one looking towards the harbor also envisages a rising sea level. So half of it's underwater. So it was quite fun. People seem to really enjoy it. You know, it's also quite subtle, but you can approach it, and there's interesting scale to it. I think the scale was quite successful. Some of the detail on that. Then the stadium was quite a challenge as well. You know, very channeled space. And the idea was to do something very lasting, so to work with mosaic was touted right at the beginning. And people have to come through the space was a bit narrower than they'd wanted. So the idea also with a small budget is we were trying to figure out how to make a kind of gateway impact without enormous areas of mosaic. And Lovell Friedman, who got this commission, was very smart about doing that. She also did a lot of research looking at the history around it. So it starts with, you know, very early histories of the Cape and moves up to the present with the emphasis on this gateway, which I think was a great solution, which is also echoes this idea of a football net. And she works with a group of mosaicists who she's worked with many years, some of whom are very skilled, come up with their own design work on it. This is one of the men who she's worked with a lot. So this was a solution to make these medallions, which are part of a procession, so it can make a big impact on a larger area without having to have a huge amount of mosaic. And I think that was pretty successful. Within that, she did a lot of research around the details. Are you laughing at? It's moving, yeah. Ooh, it's breathing. So there was a lot of research that went into that, and she pulled out a lot of nice, quirky things from the Anglo-Boer War histories to the sporting events to the skating rink. You're kidding me? Are you serious? Okay, moving on. Okay, so there we go. This was the underpass, the effect of it. So then to roll out the more complex 64, or rather we had a number of bids for the smaller stations. We had 14 stations. And we hope to run this with the CPUT actually as a student project, but the time frame didn't work. So I'm just going to run through some of the artists that were a part of it. There's a range of artists. Arlena Mahler-Aviv is a painter, a well-known painter. She works a lot with these themes. And her work translated quite successfully onto the windows here. It's interesting how it reads in different lights and inside and outside. A lot of it was really an experiment to see how this can function. And there are a number of technical issues and scale issues that are quite tricky. David Hlongwane is also a well-known painter. This was directly translated into vinyl, and it's interesting how it reads with a different light. It's quite successful. This is another drama person, Sanjan Maftik, who works with theatre. This came out of a theatre piece, actually. 2 elements. Alan Munro did a very humorous piece, which is at Table View, Southeaster Bunnies, which people really like. It's very popular, very graphic. I think this very graphic element works well for this. You know, it's fun. This is another artist, Tony Kutsia, who's is a graphic designer, worked with old and new technology. So this is the old technology next to the new technology. Hannes Bernard works with this motif of repetition, also looking at the history of the neighborhoods. He did one in Pardon Island, looking at the industry, and at Granger Bay. There's some quite strange decisions in these, but we learned some interesting things along the way. I'll just talk about this one. Hannah Hannah Williams and Mark Henning, did a whole series of the work, and they work with information technology. So I'll just speak about the first one, which is Woodstock, which I think was very successful. They worked, so the idea is to work with information technology, and in this case it was the demographic population changes of the area of Woodstock. So they looked at racial breakdown and numbers of people and traced that through history from the mid-1800s, and had some surprising results. So actually around about 1904, 1905, it had the largest population, dropped right down to a small population in the 1960s, and then grew from the 1940s up to the 1960s when the racial apartheid policies came in and began to affect the racial constitution of the area, and then how that changed again more recently with gentrification and smaller densities and so on. One other project they did. This is a weather. This is the weather area. Stop. Okay. So this one just shows you the weather across the year, the wind and the sun. So it gives you an overall impression of what the weather is like at one of the stations. Okay, thank you.